I used to believe that children imagined monsters because the world hadn't taught them what real danger looked like yet. I was wrong. The first person who ever saved my life wasn't a bodyguard, a detective, or one of the most feared men in New York. She was a little girl holding a paper plate with birthday cake in one hand and a pink balloon in the other. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet played softly enough to disappear beneath polite conversations and the clink of champagne glasses. Everything about the evening had been designed to look perfect. Expensive flowers filled the air with the scent of fresh roses. Waiters moved through the crowd with effortless precision. Wealthy donors laughed a little louder than necessary, eager to be noticed by the man hosting the charity gala. Vincent Moretti stood at the center of it all, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that somehow made him appear even taller than he already was. People called him a business magnate, a philanthropist, a man who rebuilt neighborhoods and funded children's hospitals. Others whispered different words when they thought no one could hear. They spoke of power, influence, and secrets that stretched far beyond Manhattan. Vincent had learned years ago that the truth rarely mattered. Perception always won. I had only been invited because my 6-year-old daughter refused to let the hospital auction end without donating the watercolor painting she'd spent 3 afternoons creating. "Emma, please," the volunteer coordinator had begged me. "Every child is attending with their families. We would love for Lily to be there too." I almost stayed home. My nursing shift had ended barely an hour earlier. My feet ached inside shoes I couldn't really afford, and the simple navy blue dress hanging from my shoulders had survived 3 weddings, 2 Christmas dinners, and 1 job interview. Around us, women sparkled beneath diamonds worth more than my apartment building. I kept reminding myself we were only here for 1 hour. Smile. Support the hospital. Leave quietly. Lily, however, had entirely different plans. She wandered from painting to painting with endless curiosity, stopping to compliment every child whose artwork hung on the gallery wall. She smiled at strangers as if she'd known them forever. Somewhere between the silent auction and the birthday celebration for one of the pediatric patients, she slipped her tiny hand from mine. Panic settled into my chest almost instantly. "Lily?" I called softly, weaving through clusters of guests. "Sweetheart." Then I saw her. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't frightened. She was walking directly toward Vincent Moretti. Every security guard in the room noticed her at the same time. I watched shoulders straighten. Eyes shifted. Hands subtly reached toward hidden earpieces. Vincent accepted a porcelain dessert plate from a waiter carrying slices of triple-layer chocolate cake decorated with fresh strawberries. The room applauded as someone thanked him for another generous donation. He smiled politely, lifted the fork, and just before the first bite reached his lips, Lily tugged gently on the sleeve of his tuxedo. Her small voice barely rose above the music, yet somehow every sound in the ballroom seemed to disappear. "Mister, don't eat that cake." She put something in it. For one endless heartbeat, nobody moved. Vincent Moretti did not flinch. He simply lowered the silver fork until it rested quietly against the porcelain plate, his pale blue eyes settling on Lily with the same calm focus that had made powerful men rethink their decisions before speaking. Around us, conversations faded into uncertain whispers. The string quartet continued playing, unaware that the entire atmosphere had shifted by a single sentence spoken by a child. I reached Lily just as she looked up at Vincent without the slightest trace of fear. Her fingers still held the pink balloon ribbon while the paper plate balanced carefully in her other hand. "Lily," I whispered, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I am so sorry. She has a wonderful imagination." I reached for her hand, hoping we could disappear before anyone remembered our faces. Vincent surprised me by raising one quiet hand. Not toward me, toward the security team already moving across the ballroom. Every guard stopped instantly. No shouting. No panic, just absolute silence. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Lily smiled as if he were simply another friendly adult at the children's ward where I worked. "Lily Carter." "And why do you think I should not eat this cake, Lily?" She pointed across the ballroom with complete certainty. "Because the lady in the green dress touched it after the waiter put it down." She looked around first. Then she sprinkled something on top. My stomach tightened. Children misunderstood things all the time. Maybe someone had added powdered sugar. Maybe decorations had fallen from another dessert. There had to be an ordinary explanation. Vincent glanced toward the dessert table, but his expression never changed. Which lady? Lily searched the crowd. Her smile slowly faded. She was standing right there. Her small finger remained extended, but the woman was gone. Vincent nodded once. Thank you. He handed the untouched plate to the man standing quietly beside him. I had not even noticed him before. Middle-aged, gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses. Someone who looked more like a family physician than part of Vincent's world. Would you mind checking this? Vincent asked softly. The man accepted the plate without hesitation and disappeared through a side door that blended almost perfectly into the ballroom wall. Everything happened so naturally that many guests assumed it was simply another part of the evening service. Within minutes, conversations cautiously resumed. Laughter returned, although it sounded thinner than before. I bent down beside Lily. Honey, why did you say that? She looked confused by my question. Because she did it. How do you know it was bad? Lily shrugged. She smiled before she walked away. It was not a happy smile. It was the same smile the little boy made before he hid glue in my crayons at school. I almost laughed despite my nerves. It sounded exactly like the kind of logic only a 6-year-old could believe with complete confidence. Then the gray-haired man returned. He leaned close to Vincent and whispered only 4 words. I was too far away to hear them, but I watched every trace of warmth disappear from Vincent's face. Not anger, not fear, something colder, something deeply disappointed. His eyes slowly found Lily again, and for the first time that evening, I realized he was no longer looking at her as an amusing child. He was looking at the only witness who had noticed what every adult in the room had completely missed. I expected security to escort us out within seconds. Instead, no one touched us. That somehow felt even more unsettling. Vincent spoke quietly with the gray-haired man while the charity gala continued around them, as though New York's wealthiest guests had collectively decided that pretending everything was normal was easier than asking uncomfortable questions. I knelt beside Lily and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Sweetheart, did anyone tell you to say those things? She shook her head immediately. No, Mommy. I just saw it. Did the woman talk to you? No. Have you ever seen her before? Another small shake of her head. Her green eyes searched mine with complete innocence. Did I do something wrong? My heart ached. No, honey. You tried to help someone. She smiled again, relieved, then reached into her tiny purse and pulled out a wrapped peppermint she had collected from the dessert table. It amazed me how quickly children could return to ordinary moments while adults remained trapped inside frightening ones. I looked toward the nearest exit. We needed to leave. Whatever had happened here no longer belonged to us. I took Lily's hand and began walking across the ballroom. We had almost reached the doors when a calm voice stopped me. Miss Carter. I turned slowly. Vincent Moretti stood only a few feet away. Up close, he seemed less like a celebrity and more like someone who noticed everything. His blue eyes were steady, thoughtful, impossible to read. 2 men in dark suits remained several steps behind him, close enough to protect him, but far enough to allow the conversation to feel strangely private. I apologize for delaying your evening, he said. May I ask you one question? I nodded cautiously. Of course. He looked down at Lily before returning his attention to me. Has your daughter ever done something like this before? I blinked. Done what? Noticed details everyone else overlooked. I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because it sounded absurd. She notices everything. If I change the picture frame in our apartment by half an inch, she asks why. If one of my patients cuts their hair, she remembers. She has always been unusually observant. Vincent listened without interrupting. Observation is a rare gift. Or an exhausting one, I replied with a tired smile. She keeps me honest. To my surprise, one corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It was the first genuine expression I had seen from him all night. Before either of us spoke again, the gray-haired man approached carrying the now empty dessert plate inside a sealed evidence container. He handed Vincent a folded document. Vincent scanned the page for only a second before slipping it inside his jacket. His gaze returned to me, quieter now than before. Your daughter may have prevented a very serious incident tonight. My pulse quickened. Then she was right. He did not answer directly. I would simply like to thank her. He reached into his pocket and removed a small silver challenge coin engraved with the emblem of his charitable foundation. Kneeling until he was almost eye level with Lily, he placed it gently into her palm. for paying attention when everyone else was distracted. Lily examined the coin with childlike fascination. It is shiny. Vincent smiled again, softer this time. Keep it somewhere safe. As we walked toward the revolving doors moments later, I could not shake the feeling that the evening should have been over. Instead, I glanced back one final time and found Vincent still watching us. Not with suspicion, not with gratitude alone, with the quiet determination of a man who had just discovered that the smallest witness in the room might also be the key to a much larger mystery. Sleep refused to come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vincent's expression after reading the laboratory report and the way the ballroom had seemed to exhale when he quietly set the cake aside. By 6 o'clock the next morning, I was already back at Mercy General, pulling on fresh scrubs beneath the harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look more exhausted than they really were. The familiar scent of coffee and disinfectant usually settled my nerves. That morning, it did not. My coworker Melissa noticed before I finished logging into the nurse's station. "Long night?" she asked, handing me a patient chart. I smiled automatically. You could say that. Before I could explain, my phone buzzed inside my pocket. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another spam call about student loan refinancing. Something told me to answer anyway. Emma Carter speaking. "Good morning, Miss Carter." I recognized the calm voice immediately. Vincent Moretti. My stomach tightened. "Is everything all right?" "I hope so. I only wanted to thank your daughter again. I also have a question that may seem unusual." I stepped into the empty hallway outside the pediatric wing, where only the distant beeping of heart monitors interrupted the silence. "What kind of question? Has Lily mentioned anything else about last night since you left?" I frowned. "No. She fell asleep almost as soon as we got home." There was a brief pause. If she remembers anything, even something that seems insignificant, I would appreciate knowing. Is this really that serious? Another pause, longer this time. Sometimes the smallest detail explains the largest mystery. Before I could ask another question, a cheerful voice echoed from behind me. "Mommy." Lily came running down the hallway with my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who watched her before school whenever I worked early shifts. Lily wrapped her arms around my waist, then froze the instant she noticed the phone against my ear. Her smile disappeared. "Is that the cake man?" I covered the receiver. "Yes." She looked strangely thoughtful. "Tell him the lady had a bird on her wrist." I blinked. "A bird?" Lily nodded confidently. "A tiny blue bird." I slowly lifted the phone again. She just remembered something. Vincent did not interrupt as I repeated Lily's words exactly. When I finished, the silence on the other end felt heavier than before. "That helps more than you realize," he said quietly. "Thank you." The call ended without another explanation. I stared at the dark screen for several seconds before slipping the phone back into my pocket. "Mommy," Lily whispered, tugging gently on my scrub sleeve. Did I remember the right thing? I knelt beside her. "You always tell me what you see. That is enough." She smiled, satisfied with the answer, and skipped toward the coloring table outside the children's playroom. I watched her disappear around the corner before returning to my shift. Less than an hour later, a black luxury sedan rolled silently into the hospital parking lot. It remained there without anyone stepping out. From the third-floor nurse's station, I barely noticed it. But inside the car, Vincent studied a photograph displayed on a tablet. It showed a close-up image captured from the gala security cameras. On the wrist of a woman wearing a green evening gown rested the faint outline of a tiny blue bird tattoo, almost invisible beneath a diamond bracelet. Vincent closed the file and looked toward the hospital entrance. "We found her," he said softly. "Now we need to make sure she does not find them first." The rest of my shift passed in a blur of medication rounds, worried parents, and smiling children who somehow managed to find joy even inside hospital walls. By the time I clocked out, the late afternoon sun painted long golden reflections across the parking lot. My shoulders ached, and all I wanted was to pick up Lily from school, order pizza, and forget that Vincent Moretti had ever entered our lives. Fate rarely listened to simple plans. Lily came running through the elementary school doors with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her blonde ponytail swinging wildly as she laughed with two classmates. The moment she spotted me, she waved enthusiastically before stopping halfway across the sidewalk. Her cheerful expression faded. She leaned closer and whispered, "Mommy, the bluebird lady is here." Every muscle in my body tightened. Where? Lily looked toward the opposite side of the street where parents waited beside parked cars. She was standing by the tree. She looked at me and then walked away. I followed her gaze. The sidewalk was crowded with families, crossing guards, and teachers saying goodbye for the day. No woman in a green dress. No obvious tattoo. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. I forced a smile. Maybe you saw someone who looked like her. Lily frowned. No, it was her. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. The same unknown number. Miss Carter, Vincent said the moment I answered. His voice remained calm, but this time there was unmistakable urgency beneath it. Where are you? I hesitated. Outside Lily's school. Please stay exactly where you are. My pulse quickened. Why? Because someone has been following you for the last 12 minutes. I instinctively pulled Lily closer. My eyes searched every parked vehicle, every passerby, every face that suddenly seemed unfamiliar. How do you know that? Because my security team has been following them. My mind struggled to catch up with his words. You have been watching us. Since this morning. I should have been furious. Instead, all I felt was confusion. You had no right. Probably not, he admitted. But I was not willing to gamble with your daughter's safety. A black sport utility vehicle rolled quietly to the curb 20 feet away. Two professionally dressed men stepped out, neither rushing nor creating alarm. They blended into the afternoon crowd so naturally that most parents never looked twice. Those are my people, Vincent continued. They are there to make sure you get home safely. I stared at them in disbelief. This is completely unnecessary. I sincerely hope you are correct. Before I could argue again, Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. Mommy. I looked down. She was no longer watching the security team. She was staring toward a silver sedan idling across the street. That car has been here since we came outside. One of Vincent's men subtly turned his head in the same direction. He spoke quietly into the microphone hidden beneath his collar without changing his pace. The silver sedan remained parked for another few seconds before slowly pulling away and disappearing into traffic. No horns. No dramatic chase. Just one ordinary car blending into hundreds of others. Did you see who was driving? Vincent asked. No, I answered honestly. Neither did I. He paused before speaking again. Miss Carter, I know this is difficult to accept, but until we understand why your daughter witnessed what she did, I cannot assume yesterday was an isolated event. Please allow my people to protect you, at least for a few days. I looked at Lily clutching the small silver coin Vincent had given her, completely unaware that ordinary life had quietly slipped beyond our reach. For the first time since the charity gala, I realized this was no longer a story about a mysterious warning. Someone else had started paying attention to my daughter, and that frightened me far more than anything I had seen inside that glittering ballroom. That evening I locked every window in my apartment twice before finally convincing myself to stop checking. The old radiator rattled against the wall, the refrigerator hummed in the tiny kitchen, and traffic drifted through the cracked living room window like distant waves. Normally those familiar sounds helped me relax. Tonight they only reminded me how thin the walls really were. Lily sat cross-legged on the worn rug coloring a picture of a bluebird perched on a giant oak tree. Every few minutes she glanced toward the front door as though expecting someone to knock. Mommy, she asked quietly, do you think Mr. Vincent eats dinner alone? The question caught me completely off guard. Why would you ask that? She carefully switched from a green crayon to a blue one. He looked lonely. Children had an unsettling way of noticing things adults overlooked. I thought about the crowded ballroom filled with hundreds of smiling guests. Vincent had spoken with everyone, yet somehow he had seemed completely alone in the middle of the celebration. Before I could answer, someone knocked softly on the apartment door. My heart skipped. I looked through the peephole and found Vincent standing alone in the hallway, dressed not in an expensive suit, but in a charcoal sweater beneath a dark wool coat. No cameras. No crowd. Just one man holding a white bakery box tied with blue ribbon. I opened the door only a few inches. You found my address. He offered a faint apologetic smile. The hospital volunteer coordinator had it on file. I realize arriving unannounced is not ideal. I folded my arms. That is one way to describe it. He nodded as though he deserved the criticism. May I have 5 minutes? I hesitated before stepping aside. Lily looked up from the floor and immediately recognized him. Cake man, she announced with complete delight. Vincent actually laughed, the sound quiet and genuine enough that it surprised both of us. I suppose that is my official name now. He placed the bakery box on our small dining table and slowly opened the lid. Inside sat 6 oversized chocolate chip cookies decorated with colorful frosting. "No cake this time," he said. "I thought cookies might have a better reputation." Lily giggled so hard she nearly dropped her crayons. I realized it was the first time since the gala that she looked completely carefree. Vincent knelt beside her drawing, studying the bluebird with unexpected interest. "That is beautiful." Lily proudly pointed at the bird's tiny wings. "They help him find his family." Vincent remained silent for a moment before asking, "Does he ever get lost?" "Everybody gets lost," she answered matter-of-factly. "The important part is when somebody keeps looking." The room grew strangely quiet. I noticed Vincent staring at the drawing far longer than anyone normally would. Something in Lily's simple words seemed to settle deep inside him. He finally stood and turned toward me. "Miss Carter, I came for another reason as well." His expression became serious again, though not frightening. "The woman with the bluebird tattoo has disappeared. Her apartment is empty. Her phone has been abandoned. Whoever she worked with knows we are asking questions." I felt the warmth drain from my face. "What does that mean for us?" "It means I was right to worry." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a card with one phone number written in black ink. "Day or night. If anything feels unusual, you call me directly." Not my office. Not my assistants. Me. I looked from the card to the man standing inside my modest apartment, surrounded by mismatched furniture and a 6-year-old's crayons. The distance between our worlds could not have been greater, yet somehow it felt smaller than it had only 24 hours earlier. As Vincent walked toward the door, Lily called after him, "Do not forget your cookies." He smiled over his shoulder. "Those were never for me." For the first time, I saw something beyond the reputation, the headlines, and the whispered stories. I saw a man who had spent years building walls around himself, only to have a little girl open a door he never expected anyone to find. The next 3 days almost convinced me that life was finally returning to normal. Lily went to school. I worked my shifts at Mercy General. The black sport utility vehicle still appeared at a respectful distance every morning and every afternoon, never close enough to embarrass us, always close enough for me to notice. At first I hated it. Then, without realizing when it happened, I started looking for it before pulling out of the hospital parking lot. Safety has a strange way of becoming familiar. On Friday evening, the pediatric wing organized a small family art program for children wading through long treatments. Lily loved helping paint paper butterflies while I volunteered after my shift. The room buzzed with laughter, crayons rolling across plastic tables, and parents smiling through exhaustion. For 2 wonderful hours, the outside world disappeared. I was cleaning brushes in the sink when I noticed Lily was no longer sitting at the craft table. My heart skipped once. "Lily," I called, expecting her cheerful voice to answer immediately. Nothing. I checked the reading corner. Empty. The hallway outside the playroom. Empty. A nurse pointed toward the hospital garden. "I think she stepped outside a minute ago." I hurried through the glass doors into the small courtyard where children often watched butterflies around the flower beds. Lily stood near the stone fountain speaking with an elderly woman holding a bouquet of white lilies. The woman smiled warmly before walking toward the parking lot without rushing. Something about her seemed ordinary, yet something felt wrong. "Lily," I called, trying to keep my voice calm. She ran back to me. "Mommy, that nice lady asked if I liked flowers. Did you know her?" "No." "Did she tell you her name?" Lily shook her head. Before I could ask another question, the black sport utility vehicle stopped just outside the garden entrance. One of Vincent's security men stepped out, his expression unusually tense. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "may we speak with you for a moment?" My stomach tightened again. What happened? He looked toward the parking lot where the elderly woman had disappeared. Our cameras followed her from the moment she entered the hospital. She never visited a patient. She never checked in at reception. She came here only to speak with Lily. I instinctively pulled my daughter closer. Did she do anything? No, but she asked questions. My pulse quickened. What kind of questions? He glanced toward Lily before lowering his voice. Whether your daughter still carried the silver coin Mr. Moretti gave her. I looked down immediately. The coin was gone. "Lily," I whispered carefully, "where is your coin?" She reached into her jacket pocket, then checked the other one. Her smile faded. I had it when we came. She searched her tiny backpack, then looked up at me with frightened eyes. It is missing. Before panic could completely take over, my phone rang. Vincent. I answered instantly. Emma. It was the first time he had called me by my first name. Listen carefully. The coin was never just a gift. I felt my knees weaken. What do you mean? There is a tiny identification marker embedded inside it. It was designed so my security team could locate it if necessary. I stared at the empty pocket inside Lily's jacket. Someone wanted that coin? No, Vincent answered quietly. Someone wanted to know whether Lily still had my protection. A cold breeze swept across the hospital garden, carrying fallen leaves around the fountain where children had been laughing only minutes before. I looked at Lily clutching my hand so tightly her little fingers trembled. For the first time since all of this began, I understood that whoever had been watching us was no longer interested in the past. They were testing how close Vincent intended to stay to the little girl who had changed everything. Vincent arrived at the hospital less than 20 minutes later, yet it felt as though he had been carrying the weight of that moment for years instead of miles. The black sport utility vehicle rolled quietly beneath the emergency entrance lights, and he stepped out wearing the same charcoal coat from earlier that week. No expensive entourage, no display of authority, just a man walking with determined purpose toward a frightened mother and a confused little girl. Lily ran to him before I could stop her. I am sorry, she whispered, lowering her eyes. I lost your shiny coin. Vincent knelt until they were the same height and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair away from her face. No, he said softly. Someone took it. That is not your fault. She looked up, searching his face for disappointment. Finding none, she wrapped her small arms around his neck. For a brief second, Vincent closed his eyes. I realized then that no one had probably hugged him without hesitation in a very long time. He stood slowly and turned toward me. Emma, I owe you the truth. His voice carried none of the guarded confidence I had grown used to hearing. The identification marker inside that coin was not designed only for emergencies. It also signaled to certain people that anyone carrying it was under my personal protection. I stared at him in disbelief. You marked my daughter? I protected her the only way I knew how. Before I could answer, the gray-haired advisor approached carrying a tablet computer. He quietly showed Vincent several security images captured from nearby traffic cameras. One photograph stopped me cold. The elderly woman from the hospital garden was removing a wig as she entered the silver sedan. Another image showed the same woman wearing an elegant green dress at the charity gala only days earlier. It was her, I whispered. Vincent nodded once. The bluebird tattoo was hidden beneath makeup today. The advisor spoke carefully. She abandoned the vehicle 30 minutes ago. Inside we found only one thing. He placed the small silver coin into Vincent's hand. It had been carefully polished and wrapped inside a plain white handkerchief. Nothing else. No message. No fingerprints. Just the coin. Vincent studied it for a long moment before handing it back to Lily. This belongs with you. She accepted it carefully but did not put it into her pocket. Instead, she slipped it into my hand. Mommy should keep it. My heart tightened. Somewhere during the past week, childhood had quietly become a little more cautious. Vincent looked toward the hospital windows where families moved through brightly lit hallways, carrying balloons, flowers, and overnight bags. This ends now, he said almost to himself. No more watching from a distance. I folded my arms. What does that mean? He met my eyes without looking away. The people responsible were never interested in harming a child. They wanted leverage. They wanted uncertainty. They wanted me distracted. And now? I asked. Now they know something I refuse to admit. His expression softened as he glanced toward Lily, who was showing the silver coin to one of the security officers as though it were nothing more than a lucky charm. They know I care what happens to both of you. The words settled between us in complete silence. They were not a declaration of romance or obligation. They were simpler than that, honest enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. I realized that every decision Vincent had made since the gala had slowly changed him as much as it had changed our lives. He had begun by protecting witnesses. Somewhere along the way, he had started protecting people. And perhaps that difference was the one thing his enemies had never expected. 1 year later, the city looked exactly the same, but somehow everything that mattered had changed. Spring sunlight poured through the tall windows of the children's wing at Mercy General, warming the colorful murals and filling the hallways with gentle light instead of fluorescent glare. The annual hospital fundraiser had returned, bringing together volunteers, doctors, local businesses, and families whose lives had crossed inside these walls. This time I walked through the front entrance without feeling out of place. Lily skipped beside me wearing a pale blue dress with tiny embroidered birds along the hem, proudly carrying a fresh watercolor painting she planned to donate. She had grown an inch since the previous year, though she still reached for my hand whenever the room became too crowded. "Do you think Mr. Vincent will like this one?" she asked, lifting the painting carefully. A large oak tree stretched across the page while a single bluebird rested on one branch beneath a bright morning sky. I smiled. "I think he will love it." A familiar voice answered before I could say anything more. "I already do." Vincent stood a few feet away, no longer surrounded by an invisible wall that kept everyone at a careful distance. He still wore perfectly tailored suits because some habits never disappeared, but the guarded expression that had once defined him had softened into something quieter. The lines around his eyes no longer came only from responsibility. Sometimes they appeared because Lily had discovered another joke that only 6-year-olds could invent. She ran straight toward him, holding up the painting with both hands. "It is finished now." Vincent accepted it with surprising care, as though it belonged in a museum instead of a child's art show. "The bird found his family," he observed. Lily nodded proudly. "I told you he would." I watched them together, remembering the frightened little girl who had tugged on a stranger's sleeve during a glittering gala exactly 1 year earlier. Neither of them had known that a single sentence would quietly redirect 3 lives. The fundraiser continued around us with laughter, music, and children racing between activity tables. Parents thanked volunteers. Nurses reunited with former patients who now returned healthy enough to run through the hallways. Life kept moving forward, carrying hope in ordinary moments instead of dramatic ones. Vincent stepped beside me as Lily joined a group of children decorating cupcakes. "She still notices everything," he said with a smile. "Yesterday she told me I needed more plants in my office because the room looked lonely." I laughed. "Did you buy plants?" He looked almost embarrassed. 3 of them. We stood in comfortable silence watching Lily help a younger child spread blue frosting across a cupcake, without worrying whether it looked perfect. "Emma," Vincent said quietly, "for years I believed strength meant never needing anyone. I built my life around control because it felt safer than trust." He glanced toward Lily before continuing. "She proved me wrong without ever trying." I looked at the little girl whose kindness had never depended on titles, wealth, or reputation. She had simply spoken when she believed someone needed help. Everything else had followed. Vincent carefully handed the watercolor painting to one of the auction volunteers before turning back toward us. There were no grand speeches, no impossible promises, no dramatic declarations. He simply reached for Lily's small hand as we walked together through the hospital garden where blue flowers had begun blooming beneath the warming spring sun. Watching them disappear down the winding stone path, I finally understood something that had taken me an entire year to learn. Power may command attention, and fear may demand obedience, but neither can change a human heart. Sometimes all it takes is one observant little girl, one honest warning, and the courage to care about a stranger before the world gives you a reason to.